Variable to 10 knots. Cloudy periods with a chance of a shower.
And IAEA safeguards, including special inspections, as part of an overall settlement of this issue. That could be a constructive step if it means that North Korea is also committed to freezing the major elements of its nuclear program while new talks took place, that is, not refueling the reactor or reprocessing the spent fuel it has just removed, and permitting the IAEA to maintain the continuity of safeguards. After confirming this meaning of the message from North Korea in diplomatic channels, we would be prepared to go to a third round, acting as we have before, pursuant to UN resolutions. Meanwhile, we are continuing to consult on our sanctions resolution at the Security Council.
Why would we go to a third round at this time when we still have not been satisfied about the prior potential violations?
We have, from the beginning of the effort to engage the North Koreans bilaterally, described the basis for these talks. And the basis for the talks involved a number of elements. Among those elements was an element that described the requirement that the North Koreans not discharge fuel from their reactor without providing for adequate IAEA safeguards. And the reason for that is because when the fuel is discharged from the reactor, it's possible if the IAEA can do what it wants to do for the agency to figure out what happened in 1989, to get at the cause of this problem in the first place. The reason we are not talking to the North Koreans today is because although they met the other bases for our dialogue at the end of May and through early June, they did discharge fuel without the adequate safeguards. What we said at that point is that we would return the matter to the Security Council. We also said that if an adequate basis could be established, we would, of course, always return to talk to the North Koreans. Our objective in this matter is not to seek sanctions. Seeking sanctions is a means. The objective, of course, is to get the North Koreans to the table to discuss this issue and resolve it. And that's what we're aiming to do. The point today, I think, for you is that there may be in this message a basis for returning to talks with the North Koreans.
Should we delay the sanctions then? Should we delay the resolution, or should we proceed in trying to get support for the resolution since it has its own built-in delay?
As I indicated, we are at the United Nations in New York today continuing our consultations on sanctions. At the same time, we plan to explore in diplomatic channels the meaning of the message we received today. Yes.
Why do you need a further explanation? Don't you think President Carter is able to convey a message?
We listened very carefully to President Carter today, and we understood his message, I think, in whatever detail President Carter conveyed it to us. This is a complicated matter. There are elements, as I tried to indicate in the statement, which remain to be clarified. Our intention is, in fact, through diplomatic channels to try to clarify those elements. If the message means the kinds of, it conveys the kinds of meaning that I indicated, namely that the North Koreans are prepared to take particular steps to reestablish the basis for our dialogue, and that is the suspension of reprocessing, suspension of refueling of the reactor, and maintaining the continuity of safeguards. Under those circumstances, we would find a basis adequate to resume a dialogue.
Mr. Galucci, in the past you've said that the North Koreans should discuss these nuclear issues with the International Atomic Energy Agency and not with the United States, that if they made progress with the IAEA, that would set the stage for a higher level resumption of discussions with the United States. Is the Clinton administration now backing away from that position and opening up the door to direct technical negotiations with North Korea skirting the IAEA?
No. All along, the United States has made it clear that when it gets down to ultimately what is acceptable in terms of international safeguards, it's going to be a matter for the IAEA to set that standard. That's what it does. What we have been doing is undertaking a dialogue with the North Koreans when the circumstances were right for such a dialogue, and they have not, I remind you, been right since last July, in order to establish a basis for the IAEA to continue its effort with the North Koreans to apply the correct safeguards. That will still be the objective of a dialogue. It will still be to create circumstances in which the North Koreans can come into compliance with IAEA safeguards. The determination of when they're in compliance will not be made by the United States. It will be made by the IAEA.
Carter seemed to think he had some breakthrough today. I take it from what you're saying here today that it might be, but you can't tell. Is that correct?
I think it's fair to say that we looked at the message. We see possibly some new elements in the message. We will be exploring the meaning of the message in diplomatic channels, and only after we're able to do that will we be able to characterize it.
Do you also see possibly an attempt here to create an atmosphere in which sanctions are less likely, to buy more time?
Our objective here is not to buy more time.
Not for you, for them.
I see you're talking about the interpretation.
Are they trying to weaken your hand with the Chinese?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I don't.
Could we get that?
Can we get that on camera, please?
We've been listening to Assistant Secretary of State Robert Gallucci in the White House briefing room. And Bernie, as we want to remind our audience, the reason the lights went dark there is there were White House ground rules for the press saying that we could only record the first 5 or so minutes of that briefing from Secretary Gallucci about, as you heard, the status of I'm told now that the lights are back on, Mr. Gallucci again.
And what I will tell you is we will look at what they say and what they are prepared to do, and we'll act on that basis.
You sound rather degrading of Mr. Carter. Why aren't you joyous? Why aren't you happy that he's come to some conclusions? He's gotten farther along than you all have.
Well, our reaction, the question is why don't I have more joy? I guess
Well, the lights are off again.
You know, that's very interesting there. When he was asked a question by CBS's Bill Plant for clarification, they brought the White House lights back up. And when Sarah McClinton asked that critical question, obviously, of the president, they took the lights back down and they kept them down. Please, no phone calls or letters. We do not control those lights at the White House.
Absolutely. That's completely up to the folks who work on the White House staff and operate the press briefing room. We should say, Bernie, that we apologize for not being able to complete our interview with Reverend Falwell. Jerry Falwell, we were talking to him earlier. We did have to interrupt that because we wanted to bring you the comments from Secretary Gallucci at the White House today.
And President Clinton is coming up in that same briefing room in about 15 minutes. Inside Politics is over. I'm Bernard Shaw.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Thanks for being with us.
This has been a